All right, we're back. And it is Tuesday, middle of February. It's hard to believe it's February already. I was thinking this morning as I'm not going to lie, I slept in a little bit. And I'm not going to lie, you slept in a little more than me.
It was wonderful.
uh, I don't know.
Sometimes, Dan, we
Sometimes our
just need
bodies just
to.
need it. Yeah, I'm getting old, and I was at the gym yesterday, and it seems like day after I get a good workout in,
Mhm.
my body needs rest. But anyways,
And just, I know that some people may know this, but when you say going to the gym, I don't think that adequately describes what you're doing.
well,
So I want to just say it's not just like going and lifting some weights, which kudos to all the people in
that's
the
hard
world who
too.
do that.
We did that before, and that's
Okay.
definitely a different
So,
kind of
but
hard.
like you're fighting people.
Yeah.
You have real live opponents that you are having to navigate their next move. It's mental as well as physical. So I'm just saying it's not just the gym, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Our dog just gave a protest yawn because she can't be in the podcast. Yeah, I do jujitsu, as many people know. And yeah, anyways, we're not going to talk
So
about
you
that.
needed to, yeah. I woke up and I'm like, "Ah, it just feels good. It feels so good to just lay here." That's
Mm.
what I said.
But as I was laying there this morning, trying to wake up, drinking a lot of coffee, it just hit me. I was like, it's middle of February.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I always mark like the times. Yesterday was my brother's birthday. Happy birthday, Sam. Let me know when you can get on the podcast. um, but his birthday is February 17th, and I always kind of think like, oh my goodness, it's the middle of February. Yeah, crazy. It is really true that the older you get, time seems to accelerate. I've heard the theory, and this is not our topic today, but
Yeah.
I've heard the theory that that has something to do with the fact that like you've lived more life than you have life left, and so the perception of time seems to go
Mm,
faster. I don't know.
mm,
I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that even really makes
mm.
100% sense, but I can definitely attest to the fact that time flies as you're getting older.
Yeah,
The
I feel the
days are
same
short.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. I don't understand it either. But I will say this too, and I'm going to say shame on me for this. That alone is not enough to motivate me to do more on
That,
certain days.
that the time is short.
Yeah. Like if I
Yeah.
say to myself, if this is the last day that I had to be alive, what would I want to do? What
Mm,
would I want to say? How would
yeah.
I want to behave?
Yeah.
It used to make me feel like, ooh, like a fire in me, like and now it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm missing something. That's terrible. I'm saying shame on me for this
No, I'm right there
because
with you.
I'm like, man. And so it's something I've thought about
Yeah.
a lot recently.
Well, when we were young, I know the two of us. I, I remember the days our motivation and drive was just insatiable. Like we
Yeah.
would just go and go and go, whether it was, early, like in our early 20s, dating years to early marriage years. We talked about this before in personal conversations. Our ability to socialize was unprecedented. Like
We were hardly home.
we were hardly home, and it's no wonder we lived in a tiny apartment because
We just
it,
slept there.
it didn't make sense. It was just a
Yeah.
place to sleep. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes memory does have a way of inflating things like this, but I don't think it's that far off to say that
No,
we were out every night.
we were out every night.
Every
And so,
night.
like, as if driving an hour to church
Right.
on a Wednesday evening
Right.
was not enough. We were working.
We had jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't enough. We had to go out to eat with the same people
After church.
after church
Mm-hmm.
to make it an even later night.
Mm-hmm.
We would sometimes be up till 2 in the morning at Friendly's.
Regularly.
Friendly's, having ice cream with our group of friends. That was like the every time group of friends.
Yeah.
And we would drive home to New Jersey, about an hour drive
Mm-hmm.
after staying there till because they were like 24 hours or something. I don't know.
It's like a
They
diner.
super
Yeah.
late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or yeah. And then we would get up and go to work and we'd hate ourselves for staying up so late. But we would did then what, Thursday night? Okay, let's go to where was it? Oh, I'm thinking of Bennigan's. That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking
That was
of.
a hot spot for us. Yeah.
Yeah. And so but we would
Kilkenny's country chicken
I was
salad.
trying to think of that,
Oh, mommy,
Kilkenny's.
with honey mustard dressing, that was my
That was,
jam.
like, our thing.
Yeah. But
We
yeah,
both enjoyed that, but
e
we were every night.
every night without fail. I mean, if we didn't, it would have been out of pure exhaustion or everybody else did had nothing. I don't, there was nothing, nobody was available, right? But
Mm,
most nights during that
yeah.
phase of our lives up in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland area,
Mhm,
we were doing something socially or ministry every night of
mhm.
the week. And then, it continued.
We would stay with my parents too. Sometimes we would go up if there was a
Yeah.
busy weekend, we'd go up and
Family.
stay in Maryland Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
Hmm.
and then we would just pack that full with anything,
We were
everything.
gypsies. We were, we were
You know what?
gypsies.
I embrace that. I'm
Well,
okay with that.
I'm not,
If
not.
that if
I
that
was
is
okay. I
true,
might have
I'm
been
okay
okay
with
back
it.
then. I'm not okay with that now. I
Yeah.
definitely enjoy my home and solitude more nights than probably are
Mhm.
healthy for me. But thinking through when we moved to North Carolina, we were youth pastors at a church, rural church in central North Carolina, Lexington, and same thing.
I know, I was just thinking, I would get home from work at, like, sometimes 5 or 6,
Yeah,
and I would literally make myself a Slovak coffee,
yeah.
strong
Turkish,
espresso,
Slovak,
Turkish
yeah,
Slovak, okay, so
yeah,
I'd make myself a coffee,
hmm,
and out the door I'd go. I'd down it.
yeah.
I mean, they were espressos, down it hot, ready to go. Okay, alright, out the door to a youth event, and then
If it wasn't a youth event for me anyway,
mhm,
I also worked about 20, 30 minutes, commute, uh, to the home that we're living in. And, I was either writing curriculum, I was doing,
mhm,
a website, I was, meeting with a young person or a parent, I was running an event,
mm,
something in the district, it was, I think at that phase more than anything, that's one of my, at least for me, curious what you think, that's probably when my drive peaked is during that time. So that would be like mid 20s,
mhm,
mid to late 20s.
mhm,
And the sheer amount of workload that we were putting,
mm.
it was,
I remember there were times when we literally had a parent drop a kid off
yeah,
on our doorstep and say, "Here,
they're yours.
take them."
Not permanent, not like
No,
custody, but,
like
some conflict was going on and they just needed a break and they would drop kids off at our
yeah,
house.
and
Yeah,
they'd stay the weekend,
yeah,
and we'd be like, "Okay, dude,
yeah, no worries.
you need what do you need anything? I don't even know." Like, "Hey,
We
welcome."
lived we lived in a quite small home, very modest home. First it was an apartment, but then later a home. I want to say it was like 1,680 square feet, if I recall. I remember those kind of things. We had that home for a while because I made it a rental property, but 1,680 square feet,
Mhm. We had
small home,
2
and
guest rooms.
two guest room because we didn't have kids. So it was a 3-bedroom house, but small, very very small. And I remember um, we had them over a couple times, but we had a band from Atlanta. So Ryan Johns from Atlanta West and his whole band back in the day, they used to play a lot of contemporary music that we like, a lot of
That
Switchfoot. We're
Switchfoot,
big Switchfoot
yeah.
fans. And so I don't remember what the event was. I think they did a district event and then they came and did a youth event for us. And I don't know what, eight young guys and teenage men stayed in our house. They were just all, we were teenagers everywhere.
We just were
That was
like,
normal for
if
us.
our door was just open.
Yeah, we need to be more
I
like
love
that in that
that.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we okay, so just in our defense, Dan,
Yeah.
we have hosted exchange students,
Yes, we
and that's
have.
open doors.
Yeah.
And then we have also, help with foster care.
Yes.
Um, so
Respite, long term.
respite, yeah.
Yep.
So I mean,
No,
yes,
it's
but no,
just
I agree with you. We need to get to even more open doors. Yes.
I do think that's important. Opening your home, opening your heart to
Yeah.
strangers, people. That's a powerful thing. It's always, we kind of joke because, Christy brought up uh, foreign exchange students. We did that twice,
Hmm.
one for a summer, one for a whole year,
Yeah.
school
School
year.
year. Yeah.
And
We grew so much. I had never
yeah,
had a teenager before.
yeah, we went straight into it. We still had like young kids, and we went straight into teenage parenthood. But overall, I guess the point I was trying to make is they were always anytime we did that kind of stuff, it was so enriching.
Yeah.
And it's work, and
I've thought of
it's not
doing it
always
again
positive,
recently. I've thought of doing it again, just by the way.
well,
Yeah.
maybe. I would not be opposed to that, but
Yeah. It'd have to be the right,
yeah. So for those of you that are
thing.
listening and are wondering about that, I know we're going down memory lane a lot here. It's worth sharing some information for you. I do encourage, and I do think that for people listening, this wasn't what we are going to talk about, but I think it does tie into what we're going to talk about. We
Mm,
won't be too long today,
goodness, don't make me cry right now.
but
You're already gonna make me cry.
opening yourself up
Ah.
to, um, the Bible uses the word, uh, um, the fatherless and the widowed.
Mm,
But I think we have to take so that scripture is. I should probably look it up. I don't know, Christy, if you remember it, but
mm,
it's basically, we all know it. It's I believe it's the words of Jesus, and multiple times through the scripture, encouraging us as followers of God to care for the fatherless and the widowed, and especially the New Testament church. I feel like that is a calling. That is love manifest. That is the heart of God to care for the fatherless and widowed. With that said, in the context of that culture at the time, you have to kind of think, what does fatherless and widowed mean? Without getting to a extended Bible study here, I think if you transpose that to our modern culture, that expands to a lot more people groups.
mm,
That would be foster kids. That would be foreign exchange students. That would be teenagers needing a weekend away from their
mm,
parents. That would be a lot of different
mm.
situations.
So fatherless being their father is not currently present in their lives because they are away from their
Well, in
family,
that
like
culture,
that?
being fatherless would large most, I think divorce was pretty unheard of back then. So being fatherless means your father died,
Mm.
and
Oh.
which would have been common because the age gap of marriage. If you study that time, it would be very common to have a father that's 20 years older than the
Mhm,
mother, um, or wars.
mhm,
Fathers died, dangerous jobs. It was way more common. And the point is, to be fatherless means you had no provider. There was no way for
mm,
mothers to. There's no factories. There's no office jobs, so they would tend to be quite poor. To
mhm.
be fatherless would have been a sentence of poverty and destitution. So anyway, but the point is, so it's not so much the point of that you don't have a father, it's
Okay.
that people in need, right?
Mm,
So that's why I kind of extend that to foster kids, right?
mhm,
Obviously they're fatherless and motherless in a lot of cases, but it's more so people in dire straits and needs.
mhm.
All that to say, I do feel like that is a calling of the modern day church to open your lives and homes up to it.
And
And
the
Christy,
culture that we were able to
yeah,
just experience,
yeah.
um, just some very, very different
Mm.
than ours, and not necessarily in a.
You're talking about the foreign exchange students that we
Yes,
did. Yes.
yes, I'm talking
So
about that.
we did a girl from France, south of France,
Mhm,
in
we
Bordeaux.
hosted.
We
Mhm.
hosted, fantastic, very talented young lady who's, an Olympian alternate, right now, just so talented. But that was many years ago now. And then we did, for a whole school year, for the whole junior year,
Mhm,
of this young lady from Croatia, from the
mhm,
capital, from Zagreb, Croatia. And
mhm,
we really connected with her family. Obviously, we're part of her life for, a big part of her years.
mhm,
So we've actually traveled to Croatia and got to meet them and their extended family. They
mhm.
hosted us in their beautiful beach house. So meaningful connections. And to this day, we have video calls with them and still have deep connections. So I think it's important. There's a lot to be said about opening yourself up to strangers. The Bible calls them strangers, but people
Yeah,
that are not your immediate family. Open yourself
yeah.
up to that.
And so with one of the exchange students, who will remain nameless,
Hmm.
there were some things that we were like, you know, okay, excuse me. This is like looking to have some alternative lifestyle stuff going on and different things that we were like, how will that go over with our children,
Yeah.
you know? And so we were 'Cause they don't tell you last names, okay, so these programs, they don't tell you last names,
Yeah,
they
they
protect
protect it. Yeah.
and we're like Googling, "Okay, what does this person look like?" And, trying to learn more about and so we were finding out some other stuff, and it was not the person, but, we were we were concerned about some things, like, because when you have somebody in your home, there's a risk that
Sure.
what they believe could impact your family values and the belief of your children
Yes.
unknowingly, really, actually. And so there was a conversation that we had with one of the girls where we thought that there was a very high likelihood that she would just have this very different lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we came to have a conversation later about that with this host, with our host student, our exchange student. And she's like, "And you took me anyways?
Yeah.
You took me knowing that that could be the
And
case?"
by that point, she knew who we were and what we stood for. We
Mhm.
were dragging her to church every time, so
Not
she definitely
really. I
knew.
mean, she had a choice if she wanted to go or
She
not.
liked free restaurant meals afterwards.
We don't know.
Shout out to you, Tia.
I said they're supposed to remain nameless. Oh my word.
That's
We have
okay.
to start this over again.
No, she wouldn't mind. She would laugh.
But that was something where I think I don't know that there's a better way for you to truly show God's love
Yeah.
and acceptance. I don't know a better way than to have someone in your home living with you beside you.
Yeah.
So I think of that often, and I do love having a full house. Like we talked about for Christmas, we had like 22 people here. I could live that way. I really think I could live that way.
I would need a bunker. This is just extrovert versus introvert stuff. I would need a bunker. That's
Like a
awful.
hidden door. I see a
So
hidden door. It raises up and down, goes down into the
funny thing. So I remember. So it's we have a rather large house. We're very blessed, but as big as a house could be, the more often we have people over our house, um,
or the more people that we have, or the more
well,
often.
I
So because
remember
there's a
the
difference in
first couple
that.
times we would have, your whole family. That's typically the people we have because Christie's family's from they don't live here. My family mostly lives here, so when we have a full house, it's usually your family. But I remember the first couple times, whether we have one or two families, there would be like boundaries respected. Like if Dan goes into the bedroom or my office, which is where we're doing this podcast right now, people wouldn't come in here.
But there was no spoken rule about
There was
that.
no spoken rule, but
Yeah.
sometimes I just need a break
You
from
just gotta
people,
disappear.
so I would
Yeah.
disappear for a while. But like more recent times, like people just follow me. I'd come into my bedroom, I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of people in here. I go in my office. My
Yeah.
office was the Christmas wrapping
It
station. There's like
was. It was
people in here. I
Santa's
was like,
workshop this
where do
year.
I go?
Yeah, that's true. I took over. It
Yeah,
was Santa's workshop.
yeah. So
It had to be.
boundaries.
We
I need a
needed a
bunker.
space where the kids would not come. Um, so yeah, but opening your home, I feel like to me too, and this is more of a personal
Hmm.
thing for me, when it's just you guys, I can just, like I'm not having
When
to
it's just you guys, you mean
you guys
our
meaning
immediate family?
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have to be like always on top of like my attitude or my not that I have like a bad attitude often. I really think I'm
No,
pretty
I've thought of
easygoing,
this.
you
I've
know?
thought of this, and it's interesting because we first discovered this when we were missionaries. So this is early in
Oh,
our marriage.
yes.
We first discovered this when we were missionaries in Sri Lanka. So again, for those of you that don't know the story, we did a short-term missions appointment in Sri Lanka to help open a Bible college.
Mhm.
And so we
Short term being 6 months. So, to
6
me,
months.
that's still kind of a
It's
long.
long, but yeah, it's not
Mhm,
like years and years. But
mhm,
so anyways, we stayed on campus. So
mhm.
basically we had an apartment next to the students' dorms. As a matter of fact, basically our apartment joined the dorms because the
Yes.
way the construction was in in that region, because it's tropical, the top, everything's made out of brick. So the top course of bricks in each room, they leave every other brick out for ventilation.
Right.
Otherwise, you get mold and mildew in these places.
Yeah.
So
And with screen,
with
so that,
screens,
like but we still totally had, like, lizards coming in and stuff.
yeah, but the point is there was very little
No,
privacy
right, correct.
from an auditory perspective. So you can
Yes.
hear everything.
Yes.
The only place in our apartment, and this was considered very luxury and very blessed, our bedroom. in our 1-bedroom apartment didn't have those holes. They purposely locked them off, and it had an air conditioning unit that we were only allowed to run at night. So, because it's expensive. But that gave us some sense of privacy. But even with that, you can still hear it. The point is, what we learned is we would have to shout, or rather, we couldn't have shout arguments, and every couple gets into
Yeah.
discussions, quote unquote. But
Yeah.
when
We've
we
been
were
married for 3
there,
years at that
we were
point.
married for a few years at that point. So when we had our discussions, we had to yell at each other in a whispered
We had to
voice.
whisper yell. Faith calls it whisper yelling.
So it's interesting because we learned that back then in a unique way. But
Or we would write it. We would write out our
our
frustrations
disputes.
to each other.
But it's interesting when you have people around you,
Yeah.
you have to be nicer to each other. So
Yeah.
that
Like
is
I
interesting.
remember there was like this gigantic, I was going to say gargantuous. Is that a word? I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
Should be.
Huge. It was a spider bigger than my hand, bigger than my head.
Yeah.
Came out of nowhere and I just let out a it was just like that.
Students came running.
Yeah. Sister Christie,
Yeah.
Sister Christie, are you okay?
Yeah.
And I'm going, I'm fine. I'm fine. And that obviously, honestly, also really annoyed me that I'm like, I can't even do
Yeah.
that without somebody hearing me, and I have to be accountable for even just that.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, man, this is crazy. But we learned how to communicate better, honestly, because we
Yeah.
couldn't just say whatever we thought right the minute we said it. Like, so we have this acronym. It's called THINK that I
Mhm.
use for faith, and
Our daughter.
T, is it true? So before you say something, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it important for I? Is it necessary? And is it kind?
Mm.
And so we want to think before we speak,
Yep.
all those things. So, anyways, I feel like, yes, Sri Lanka was a huge part of growing me.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, too, having people in our home that I know I'm supposed to be an example of Jesus to, I began to hold myself at a higher standard. I should do that just every day, just with you all.
But it's easy to let your guard down around people
Yeah.
you love. Yeah.
And not that you shouldn't be transparent and who you really are
No, I
and
get it. Yeah.
express like, man, I'm feeling down today or I'm
Yeah.
struggling with this frustration. I mean, that's just good. But um yeah, man, I grow when we have people here that I remember with a respite
Yeah.
for foster care. There was a child that we were having.
Respite is basically, when a foster parent is either at their wits' end or have a situation in their life where they need a break from
Mm,
their foster
or
child,
or they're going out of state on vacation and
or
the
they're going
child
out of
can't
state and
go.
there's the judge won't allow the child to be out of state, whatever the situation is. Um, you can be, as a foster parent, a respite foster parent, where you take in that child for a short-term respite. So
Mhm.
yeah, we did that several times.
Yeah. Yeah. This one child, I remember, was biting our son
Yeah.
and left bruises, and I remember having to be so, loving, patient.
Yeah, you couldn't just scream at them, "Stop
Oh,
biting."
no, 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 no. So I remember, though, my way of dealing with, I was okay, we don't do that. Inside, I'm going, oh,
"What's
freaking
wrong
out.
with you,
What?
animal?"
Yeah. No, not like that.
That's
But,
what I would say.
well, but I was just like, okay, no, no, we don't do that. We don't bite, but I remember one way that I was able to kind of get out. It was the day that this child was going home.
Hmm.
And I remember, and they would hide under the bed. They would do something bad and go hide under the bed, and I couldn't coax them out.
Mhm.
And I remember saying, okay, okay. And I went out to the living room at our other house, and I was picking up all of their stuff. I was packing them up, getting them ready to go back. And to me, I was like, I'm taking this and you're going home. And
You're outta here.
I didn't say it with my
Of
words,
course.
but with my actions, I was like, that was my way of expressing my, okay, I'm ready for this to be done without verbally. But that's growth too.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to be held at a higher standard when you're caring for someone's child.
Totally.
And you don't know what trauma they've oh, it's just a whole world. It's a
It's a
whole
whole
'nother
thing.
world
That's a
that
whole thing.
you just unless you I actually hate the thing, "If you know, you know." I kinda hate that, it kinda drives me nuts, but I'm gonna say it on that. Yeah, if you know, you know.
Yeah,
You're
shout out to all the foster parents on, listening, but if you know, you know, that's definitely what good way to say it. So with that said, I think, um, a lot of we talked about, global missions, we talked about foster parenting, we talked about foreign exchange and just
Mm,
youth ministry and all this. All of this, has to do with the topic, and something we want to kind of share today, that we had a really good discussion last night, Christy and I, with our son, who fell asleep halfway through the conversation. But um, going back to your calling, right? And answering the call. And I feel like this is interesting for us because it's been a theme for us throughout the various phases of our calling in attempting to serve God, whether it's being embedded among Sri Lankan Bible school students, or being embedded with a lot of troubled teenagers in North Carolina, or being embedded with foster kids, or whatever it may be. It's always been around, being about opening our hearts up to people in a very close and personal way. And we kind of ran into this story in the Bible a couple different times here in the past couple of weeks, and we took a deep dive into it and want to share some of our thoughts and some of the points. So it's the story of Jonah. And I don't know about everybody listening, but it's interesting because the story of Jonah is one of those. I guess, so don't take it the wrong way if you're listening to me. Don't judge me on this, but
mm,
one of those cute stories from the Old Testament that tends to be
mm.
relegated to Sunday school flannel graphs. Shout out to you, Jonathan Russell. um, it's People take that story as again, it's a cute, almost zoology kind of story. Oh, the
Mhm.
fish ate
They get it,
Jonah.
yeah.
It's kind of
So
cool,
bizarre.
neat story. But man, you dig into this story like we did, and it is kind of mind blowing.
Mhm.
And obviously, we know, I'm sure there's preachers and people who listen to sermons about, the spiritual aspect here is about make sure you answer the call of God, right? And that is definitely
Mhm.
what made us think of this. But let me just take you guys through this. And Christy, just
Yeah.
interrupt me as we go through this, as you have thoughts here. But I'm going to read some of this. Is New Living Translation, which I think is a cool translation, especially for this Old Testament story. But
Are you
you,
reading in Matthew first? Are you gonna start
oh, no,
there?
no, no, I'm going
Oh,
to go to
okay.
Jonah first, just to set the
Okay.
context. So we all know, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically God tells Jonah, like, get up and go to Nineveh and preach to these people. They're wicked. They need to hear. Jonah's like, no, I'm not doing it. So he gets on this boat heading,
The opposite direction.
opposite direction, and this violent storm comes up. And so picking up, I guess it's verse 5, this time Jonah was sound asleep in the hold. He's in the bottom of the boat. So the captain went down after him. He says, how can you sleep at a time like this? He shouted. He says, get up and pray to your God. Maybe he'll pay attention and spare your lives. And it says that the crew starts casting, things off the, they start going through this process. And Jonah finally answers, verse 9. He says, I'm Hebrew and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. The sailors at this point are terrified because he already told them that he's running away from the Lord. And he's like, why did you do this? They groan. So the storm gets worse and worse and worse. So basically they
Mm.
ask,
Oh, can I
yeah, go
interrupt?
ahead, please do.
Okay, wow. So something just really stood out to me. When you are not following the call and the voice of the Lord,
Hmm.
you are adversely impacting the people, possibly the
Around
people
you.
around you. Those people in the ship,
Yeah.
they could have died. I
Totally.
mean,
Totally.
so in your rebellion, fear, I don't know what it was, but he wasn't going to do what he was told to do. And he put those people in danger.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that's just a revelation that I just got
It's
as you're
it's
reading it.
absolutely it's absolutely on point. In your running away from God, your calling of God, you're completely now on a different path. You're going a completely different direction, yet
Mm,
you're impacting people negatively. So not only are you sin of omission, not impacting people positively by not
mm,
answering the call of
mm.
God, now the wrath of God is falling on other people that you didn't even intend it. So yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
wow. Okay. So,
So they ask him, so what do we do to stop the storm? Verse 12. Jonah says, throw me into the sea. He says, it will be calm again. I know this terrible storm is my fault, which is interesting. We talked about this last night.
Mhm.
We were dissecting this. Really, Jonah knew. Jonah was not naive to what was going on here, clearly, right? And Jonah, so, I don't want to get to the end of this story before the beginning, but Jonah, um, I feel like he has a lot of animosity here. He doesn't want to people a lot of times I thought at least, I don't know about you guys listening, but I always kind of as a young person reading the story and hearing about it in Sunday school, I always thought, oh, he didn't want to answer the call of God because he was either afraid,
Mhm.
or he, maybe it was I'm not worthy because maybe that's because I transposed.
Mm.
That's how I felt a lot early in my
Mm.
ministry.
Mhm.
I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy.
Mhm.
But really, if you study, and we'll get to it to the end, it was not that. It was his animosity for the people of Nineveh,
Nineveh. Mhm.
modern day Iraq, right? He didn't like them. He wanted them to die. He wanted them to feel God's wrath. That was the problem. And so what's interesting here in verse 12, he says, throw me into the sea. That's not the solution. That's really Jonah knows this. And it's not the Jonah rather die. And we see this
Oh,
repeated throughout the
yes,
story.
yes.
Jonah would rather die than actually face the reality of the situation, which was go to Nineveh. So he's like, throw me into the sea. What he should have said is turn this boat around and drop me off at Nineveh. And that would have been the solution. He
Mhm.
knows that God called him to Nineveh. He said it. He told these people before he ever set off on the journey. He's like, I'm running from God. So he knows what's going on here.
So then,
But he'd rather
those
die.
people
He'd rather die.
but those people then, if somebody tells you they're running from God, just
Be-
stay away from them.
wow. Great point.
Or if you see that maybe in
If
their
you get a hint,
lifestyle.
if you get a hint from
Uh,
somebody that's around your life that is running from God, be careful, stay away from them.
yeah.
Wow, great point, Christy. Verse 13. So instead, so the sailors don't throw him in the ocean right away. They row even harder. Storm gets too much more violent. So verse 14, they cry out to the Lord. Now they're praying to Jonah's God. Oh Lord, they pleaded, don't make us die for this man's sin. Don't hold us responsible for his death. Oh Lord, you have sent a storm upon him for your own good reasons. It's justified. Verse 15. Then finally, the sailors pick Jonah up and throw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. Now you're going to say, well, Dan, clearly it was the solution. Well, hold on. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's power, and they offered him sacrifice and vowed to serve him. So now these people are
Mm,
converted by all
okay.
measure. They're
Yeah.
serving God.
Hmm.
But they threw Jonah. So let's just stop there for a second. And by the way, the last verse of chapter 1 is actually part of chapter 2 if you study it. So really, chapter 1 ends with the sailors chucking him into the ocean and the storm stopping, and they get converted.
And so one thing is that I've always thought about with this is that if Jonah knew, throw me into the sea, why couldn't Jonah just jump into the sea himself? Why did he
Yeah,
not? Why did he have to make somebody else do it for him?
he's a
And
bit
so
of a
for
coward.
that, I felt like he was, yeah, a coward. Like if you, okay, so you know the answer, throw me into the sea.
Again, but
But
the
so
reason why, I
then
think it was a little woe is me too. It wasn't the answer. The answer is to go to
it
Nineveh.
became the answer.
Well, it became the answer because God had a bigger plan, which is verse 17. The Lord arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So before we go any further here, this is one of the big things, and I can't take credit for this. I saw it on a podcast. Um, I'm not saying that's 100% true, but I never thought of Jonah as an archetype of Christ. But what we're going to see here later, it's clearly an archetype of Christ.
Mm,
Um, again, the flannel graph, the Sunday school story of Jonah is that the fish was just waiting there. And, we saw
mm,
pictures in our Sunday school books and
mm,
illustration. We probably
mhm,
colored them as kids where there's a fish waiting right outside the boat and they chuck him in. And that's that's how Jonah survives is he's in the belly of the fish. When you grow up, you're like, man, how do you survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days? Right. Turns out Jonah didn't survive.
mm. According to this podcast.
No, we're going to read it.
Okay.
Jonah definitively did not survive this. He absolutely died. So the fish is either a symbol of what's happening in the spiritual realm or something else altogether. So let's read on. So in chapter 2, it picks up with Jonah praying now, right? So what's key here, and this is why it's so definitive, because you have to listen to the words of what Jonah said in his prayer, right? So the fish grabs him.
Mhm.
We read about that, but they threw him into the ocean, and look what happens. Chapter 2 of Jonah. Jonah prayed to the Lord God from inside the fish. He said, I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called you from the land of the dead. And Lord, you heard me. You threw me into the ocean's depth, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, Oh Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. So what's interesting here is his anguish is not so much his death, it's his separation from God.
Mm.
And what, I hit me when I read this is a lot of times we want our cake and eat it too as humans. We want to be in God's presence and enjoy the fullness and the
Mhm.
blessings of God,
But not do what God says.
but not do what God says, not answer the call. And that's where Jonah
Mhm.
was living, right? He was enjoying being a Jew, a person of God's covenant, right? Uh,
So he spoke Hebrew.
he was Hebrew. He was a
Okay.
Jew. Yeah. So,
Okay.
he's part of the covenant, right?
Mhm.
Enjoying God's
Okay.
presence in his temple,
Mhm.
in relationship, in communion with God.
Mhm.
And when he's removed from that, that is his plea, right? Verse 4 again, Oh Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will once more look to your holy temple. Verse 5, I sank beneath the waves and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. Curious what that means, if anybody knows about that symbolism. Verse 6, I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth. Interesting to me. Imprisoned in the earth sounds like a burial to me. Whose gates lock
Mm.
shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatch me from the jaws of death. Snatch me from the jaws of death. Not from a fish, from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out in your holy temple, those who worship false gods. It goes on and on. And then finally, verse 10, it says, Now no longer part of the prayer. This is no longer in quotes. Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. So, um, then we know the rest of the story, which we can come back to. But
So
yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. This is going to sound like a really dumb question. The whale spit Jonah out
Hmm.
on the
The
beach.
fish.
The fish, the whale. That's what we were always taught. Big fish on the beach of Nineveh.
Um,
Does it say?
Presumably, it doesn't say. Yeah, we don't know.
Okay, so it wasn't like he just showed up on the beach and then was like, "Where am I at? I've got to go get to Nineveh." Was I don't remember the story.
It doesn't give that detail,
It
but yeah,
doesn't.
presumably, that it's somewhere near Nineveh, right?
Okay.
So,
So I'm just saying how much more of a miracle that would have been that the
yeah.
whale was like, "Okay, here you go.
Well,
I'm going to just take you to Nineveh now." I
what
mean,
what the great fish is?
I keep saying whale. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Although a whale's not a fish, right? But that's.
Thank
I
you.
think a lot of times we
I'm
say
learning
whale
so
because that's the only
much.
fish big enough. But who
I'm
knows what
learning so
exact?
much from talking to you today.
But we don't know. Back then, there might have been some creature. Who knows?
Yeah,
I personally
baby fish.
think that the fish is probably something symbolic in the spiritual realm, or the mechanism of bringing the soul back. Because I believe, and I'm about to read something to share with everybody that kind of shows this point. I believe the story of Jonah's story, is an archetype of Christ in his death and burial and resurrection. Um, and so, I believe the fish is somehow the vehicle that brings him back. And so, why do I think that? So, in Matthew, the book of Matthew, Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. So, uh, verse 38, I'll just read it again. So, one day, some teachers of religious law and the Pharisees came to Jesus. We all know the story. Teacher, we want you to show us a miraculous sign to prove your authority. So, you got a bunch of people who are saying, More miracles. You
Mhm,
haven't done
sign
enough.
seekers.
Prove to us, do something greater, and we'll believe, right?
Mm.
And it's a story there too. If you're chasing miracles, if you're somebody who is just miracle. We need another miracle. Miracles are great, but that's not what it's about. And look what Jesus says, verse 39. Uh, so Jesus says, only an evil and adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign. And look what he says here. This is where it connects Jonah as an archetype. But the only sign I will give them, so these people who are all about miracles and seeking miracles, and that's what I need, that's what the church needs. That's not what the church needs. Jesus says, the only sign I'm going to give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah. What's the sign of the prophet Jonah? Well, he says in verse 40, for as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. He's saying that
Heart
the
of the earth. Isn't that what Jonah said in his
exactly,
prayer? Okay.
exactly. Jesus, his words is saying that Jonah in the belly of the fish is analogous to Jesus in the heart of the earth. Jonah was an archetype of Christ in the death, burial, and resurrection. And he even goes on to say the people of Nineveh will stand up in this generation better than you will for people who are seeking a miracle and a sign.
Mm,
So, just absolutely amazing, this story. And there's a lot more. We can get into it here shortly
mm-hmm.
if you want. But just the fact that, you know, Jonah running away from the call of God in his life, what happens? And then what struck me, the first thing when I read this, it hit me. I'm like, okay, if he's an archetype of Christ, I immediately went back to the Garden of Gethsemane,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus praying. He's having the same battle. It's almost like the
Mm.
compare and contrast.
If this cup can
Jonah
pass from me.
gets on the boat and runs. Jesus wanted to run. There's no doubt about it. He's saying there, he's like, why do I have to drink this bitter cup? If it's possible,
Mm-hmm.
let let me not have to do this. Let me not have to go to the cross.
Mm.
Don't make me go to hell for 3 days and have to face this. This is too much. It's too bad, right? And who knows, uh, who knows what Jesus in the flesh was feeling in that moment. He knew what he was about to do.
So he was really praying. We know that.
Yeah.
I mean, from some,
As drops of blood. It was an
as drops of
intense
blood. Yeah.
prayer, intense
Which
prayer.
I don't believe it was really drops of blood, by the way. Some people will say that, but it doesn't really matter. But I think it is like super passionate prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the fact
Not
is,
my will, but thine be done. I was looking at that today in the Gospels. About there's some prayers that we were talking through as I was listening
mhm,
to our daughter quote. And I'm like, look at this, not my will, but thine be done. It's all throughout the Gospels, actually.
yeah.
And then that's the prayer, the Lord's Prayer is also not my will, but thine be done. Jesus definitely led by example.
And so, I think the point I want to kind of wrap up on this today is it answering the call of God has, point number one, it has dramatic implications on the world, both positive and negative, right? If you answer the call, you can impact some people and yourselves in extremely positive ways. And we shared, some few stories with us. I mean, can you imagine, Christy? I can almost get emotional talking about this, but can you imagine that in just those few, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of the people that we've been privileged to impact and have impacted us. But can you imagine we didn't do any of that? What would our lives be like?
We'd be totally different people.
We would be completely different people.
Yeah.
And uh,
Like we wouldn't I would think that it's added so much of a richness to our lives, our
and
experiences,
fullness.
a fullness, yeah,
I,
like a
I That's
wholeness.
the first thing I think of if we didn't answer the call in all of those. And to me, there were a chain reaction. Like answering the initial call led to the second call, to the third, fourth, and who knows what
Mhm.
the future holds. But
Yeah.
if we didn't answer those early calls, I feel
Mm.
like I just have to feel like we would be so empty. There
Yeah.
would be a void. I feel like we would,
Mhm.
at least me, I feel like I would have gotten stuck in the monotony of what this world has to offer, chasing career and the grind and stuff, and
Mm.
so much richness and fullness that our life has had to this point. Our lives are not over. It's not like we're 70 years old here. We're
Mm.
retrospective, but hopefully greater years are ahead of us. But so much to this point in 48 years, the best things have been as a result of us answering the call. And what I want to
Mhm.
share with people is the battle starts at that calling, in that wrestling. Jonah
Mhm.
fought it and almost got a bunch of people killed, and he himself did die, I believe. Um, but Jesus also wrestled. It's not like he just marched like, okay, no, he also wrestled, but he won that victory in the Garden of Gethsemane and
Mhm.
did march and brought eternal life for
Mhm.
all of mankind as a result of him marching up Golgotha's hill. It's a huge analogy and
Mhm.
correlation
Mhm.
and dichotomy between Jonah and Jesus, this archetype of Jesus in the Old Testament and you. It's a
Mhm.
big deal.
And the things that led us to these life decisions, it was through difficulty. It was through very trying
Yeah.
times. So I don't know that we knew we were called to be foster parents. I think life's circumstances revealed that.
Hmm.
I mean, right? Difficulty, very difficult times. And
Yeah. Some of the callings, and this could be a podcast on its own, but because I have a lot to say about this, but the word calling is an interesting
I think it's too
word.
heavy of a word, actually.
Well, some people, I think, make it too heavy. That's the problem. I think that,
That would be me.
well, no,
Because calling
I
is
think
like,
most
oh,
people,
scary.
including myself, I think that sometimes when we say we're called, you know, I've used this phrase before, so I'm guilty, but, and I'm half joking when I say it, but, they're looking for a burning bush. And, we expect it to be specific, time bound, and
Mm,
audible or written or whatever. But I can tell you that throughout our phases of being called, some of them were very specific, others were super, super vague, right? So you mentioned like our parenting journey. I've shared this with you. I used to have visions, dreams,
mhm.
way before we even considered attempting to try to have kids, getting pregnant. Way before that process, I
Mhm,
used to have dreams of our son,
mhm,
exactly our son, and the relationship I have with our son.
mm.
I used to have dreams, his
Yeah.
physical attributes. I used to describe them. You remember.
Mhm, mhm.
I used to wake up and tell you I would physically describe our son.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, that was a seed of pulling me to that. That was a
Mhm.
big part of me relenting to even sign up to be a foster parent. I definitely did fight you on that because there was
You
that
did.
seed within me
Scary.
that God called me to be a dad,
Mm.
and I knew that, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to run from that calling.
Yeah. My thing with you is let's just give it a try.
Oh,
Let's just try it.
she was sneaky.
No, no.
Christy sneaky.
No, not sneaky. That's just how I think of it. I mean, because there's
Yeah,
no harm in just trying things sometimes if they're the right things.
yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to say is, yeah, so I feel like circumstances can lead to, you know, like difficult circumstances lead you to take steps that you would otherwise not take.
Or not for everybody.
Well,
Yeah,
okay. Yes.
Jonah. All right, talk about a difficult situation.
Mhm.
This
And so
this
he just
storm
so
and
let me just ask you this. So or it's not really a question. It's like he was a prophet
yeah,
and he didn't love people.
clearly did not
I
love people
mean,
from
it
Nineveh.
makes me just like, oh,
And we don't have time. We're getting
it
up on
makes
a,
me,
but if you
feel
read
cringy.
it is cringy. If you want, read the last two chapters. We only covered the first two chapters of Jonah, but the last two chapters, he goes and preaches, the people repent,
Mhm,
and really the last half of chapter 3 and almost all of chapter 4 is Jonah pitching a fit
mm,
because God is showing them mercy. He's like, "Oh, also now you're gonna give them mercy? Why don't you
mhm,
strike them dead?" And then he sets up camp outside the gates,
mhm.
waiting in case God changes his mind to see if he's going to strike down Nineveh. And of
And
course,
God even shows him a miracle of this plant
God
coming
shows him
up.
this miracle, this plant gives them shelter, and then a hot wind, and ultimately tries to drive them. And the point is, like, once you're done with your calling, move on. Move on. You've
So
done your part.
so this is interesting, and I was just listening to this morning, and it just really stood out to me. Um, so Jonah speaking to the people of Nineveh,
Hmm.
he said 5 words in the Hebrew language.
Hmm.
5 words in the Hebrew language. And what we read here is 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. 8 words in the English language.
It was 5 in Hebrew.
5 in Hebrew.
Hmm.
40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. Period.
And they listened.
Walk off the
Yeah,
scene.
he didn't have a compelling sermon.
He was and like he didn't tell them What should we do?
Yeah.
But the Bible says even the cows repented. I don't know how that's possible, but it at least according to what I heard this morning, everyone repented.
Yeah.
Overturned was,
Mhm.
I guess, the key word there because, like, turned over, it's gonna what he said, he wasn't even like, "Repent, love God."
Yeah.
40 days. He gave a timeline, 40 days, and Nineveh will be overturned. Period.
Yep.
Walk off the scene. Go have your little pity party up on, in the wilderness, up in the
Well, what he should have done is he answered the call, he preached what he needed to preach, gave the message,
I just can't even believe
go
5
home.
words.
But he sits yeah, yeah, that's an interesting thing.
So all that, like, "God, raise me, I'll do what you asked me to
Yeah,
do."
reading
And
out of the
there's still
death
this,
was
like, seeming bit of, like, I don't know if it's rebellion or if it's what. He was not loving his mission.
no.
Okay, fine, here, 5 words,
Oh, he definitely was
then gone.
he was doing it out of not spite, what's the right word here? He was
He
yeah,
was forced. He was like
yeah.
a whiny baby who
He did
doesn't wanna
not
do what they're told to
he
do.
did not love the people he was called to minister to, which
Clearly, and, like, I would say hated.
he hated the people because he was bitter when God showed mercy. He was like, "Ugh,
"I knew
these
you were gonna
people
do
deserve
this."
yeah, I knew you're gonna be merciful. I knew you're slow to anger."
Ugh,
And it's like, man, you should be celebrating the fact that people
he
that
had
you've been
mercy on you just now. He just pulled you out of the
he
grave.
just gave you a symbol. And a
A
second
second
one,
chance.
you're sitting there burning in the sun and he grows this plant to give you shelter. He's showing you mercy again.
Yeah.
And man, that if you can't love the people you're called to minister to, then
Get off the scene. Go home.
yeah, yeah.
And well, that doesn't sound very nice.
I know, but that's really that's the second part of
But
Jonah is this guy, he was a pretty bitter dude
he
and
was a prophet.
he's a prophet. Prophets are people though, remember that.
I know. It's just shocking to me that
Yeah.
he's in that category, and there's only 2 chapters,
4.
4 chapters written
Mhm.
about him, and it doesn't really tell you how the story ends.
It ends abruptly. Yeah,
So
so
it's like
basically
Jonah's like, "Okay, just let me die then."
God grows this plant because again, Jonah's camping out, my opinion, it's not in the text, but my opinion, he's waiting to see if God changes his mind because God
Mhm.
shows mercy. And for
He goes
some
away to
he,
see
he
this
goes out on outside the gates, it says, and
protect himself.
camps out. He's like, all right, let's see. I bet you they're gonna mess up again. This is
Yeah.
Dan me adding to it, which I probably shouldn't, but you know, he's sitting there and he's burning up in the sun because it's Iraq. It's really hot. It's in the middle of the desert. And so this God erects this plant in 24 hours to give
Can
him
you imagine
shelter.
just sitting there? You are Jonah. You're sitting there and you're seeing, "Wait, what's happening right
Yeah,
here?" And
this
this, "Oh, this is amazing. What a miracle that is."
and then he's comforted from the sun, but then at the same time, God sends a worm to eat the stem, and this thing withers away and dies. And he
Mhm.
sends a hot westward or eastward wind. I can't
Yeah.
remember. And he suffers. And basically, God speaks up. It's like, look, just as much as I gave you mercy here, I'm giving you that mercy, and just as quick as it can go away. He's like basically saying to Jonah
Mhm.
the same thing he told Job. He's like,
Yeah.
"Who are you to question me?" Right? And but then
Mm.
the chapter in the book ends abruptly right there. We don't know what happens to Jonah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
interesting.
so like, this speaks to mental health to me. I'm gonna devour this in the future
Mhm.
about how, "Oh, wait, I didn't get my way. Okay,
Yeah,
I just wanna die."
yeah. Woe is me. God, you didn't do it my way. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Mhm.
You actually love people and you're merciful and slow to
Mhm. To my
anger.
enemies, "You love my
My
enemies."
enemies. Yeah,
How could you have mercy on my enemies?
yeah.
And why they were even his enemies, I just can't even.
Well,
It's just his mindset.
they
It's
were
literally they didn't do anything to him.
they were the precursors to the Persians who would ultimately enslave the Jews. So there was a lot of animosity there. And culturally, I get it, but to your point, in a modern day context, you're right. And more important than anything, I think the message here twofold, right? For people that are called into ministry, make sure you love people. Make sure you love the people you're ministering to,
Yeah.
especially if there are people that have been given a promise that you're literally delivering the word to. Make sure that you have the love of God in you. But you know, the second point is, right there with that word I said, for everybody listening, love people. Love people regardless, indiscriminately. The answer is always love.
Mhm.
If where there's a question, what do you do? The
Mm,
answer is always to love
mm,
people. And I'm talking to myself as much as anybody here, but
mm.
it you know,
God is love.
God, this is the nature of God.
Mm,
And if we want to be Christians, if we want to be image bearers, if we want to do people that claim to do his will, then his will is for us to love people, especially those people you're called to be around. And in the day and age we're living in, this is the church, the Christians. If you can't love Christians, if you can't love people that you're close to and you're called to minister to, that's a problem. That's a deep problem.
yeah.
Love people.
There's a scripture that says, "You have all these things, but you have not love."
Yeah.
Talking about just a loud noise.
It's
It's
like
just a
sounding
loud
brass.
noise, and
Yeah.
it's nothing. It means nothing.
Your worship, your
It's like doing all these things, but you do
no,
it and you don't have love.
that's a problem.
It's just like too much. It's like,
Mm,
stop.
yep.
Just like reset. Was having a conversation with our daughter this morning. Just reset.
Yep.
Just reset sometimes. And it's I talked also, and I don't want to go off on another topic here, but active, living actively eternal,
Hmm.
active eternal versus inactive eternal. When we live active internal or eternal, actively eternal, I can't get my words right here, then we are recognizing that we are souls just with
Mm,
flesh over top of us, you know.
yeah.
When we live inactive eternal, it's all about me, me, me.
It's about appeasing your flesh, your meat vehicle.
I don't know how I feel about what you've just said.
That's a
Oh,
Joe Rogan comment.
okay.
Meat
Okay.
vehicle.
Okay. Gosh, again. All right. I don't know. So, but yeah, so when we are not living with the idea of we are a soul, we are all souls.
Yeah.
Everyone is a soul. So when we live active eternal is the way to live, walking in the spirit.
Hmm.
But inactive eternal is flesh. And how we live, how we think is going to impact how we love,
Indeed.
you know?
Yeah.
So if we're just thinking of ourselves, then it's going to be a lot harder for us to extend mercy, grace, love to others because we're so, oh, they have offended me or they did this and I'm really mad at them for that or whatever. And that's just so temporary. All of the stuff that would make us not love other people is so
It doesn't
temporary.
matter in the grand scheme of things.
And so we give it so much attention. It's because we're in inactive eternal
Mm,
living.
yep.
Does that sound
No, it's
like it
good.
makes sense?
No, I think that basically is, correlating to the scripture, that I think the apostle Paul said, to walk in the spirit and not after the flesh. The spirit is
Mhm,
eternal, the flesh is temporary. So that is, you're saying what he said. We have to walk in the spirit, not after the flesh.
mhm.
And so, to me, I think that's the primary motivation, at least for me, for fasting,
Yeah.
is to recalibrate that walk.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
started a fast this
Christie's
morning.
on a fast.
Yeah.
I would join you, but I've been having a headache, and
Excuses, excuses. I'm
I'm
just
gonna.
kidding.
Is there a boat to Tarshish I can get on?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right,
But
everybody, we're
yeah,
gonna
but
cut it
that's
there,
yeah.
right before the hour mark. So thank you all for listening. Love people. Make sure you love people.
Dan,
Christy, I love you.
I love you too. I was just about to say, I
I
really
beat you to
do.
it. Thank you, everybody. We love you all. Bye.